Folks, I lived 6 years in Chicago, running the Chicago Defender, having the talk show on WVON radio, and I can tell you the one thing that has been consistent: corrupt Chicago cops. Now, the convictions of 7 people have been overturned as a result of another cop accused of framing dozens of people for murder. It is believed that Police Detective Reynaldo Guevara framed up to 51 people, sending all of them to prison. 7 of those people spent a combined 174 years in prison. Today, they are no longer felons. Their convictions have been overturned. We're joined now by Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx from Chicago. Kim, always glad to have you on the show. You know, this has to be the worst nightmare for someone where you didn't commit a crime and you were framed for it by a cop, someone who people trust, juries trust, DAs trust, people trust, supposed to trust their work. So what in the hell happened here with this detective?
Well, first, thank you for having me back, Roland. It's always a pleasure. But this was a detective who was working in the Humboldt Park neighborhood in the city of Chicago in the late 80s and 90s when homicide rates were astronomical. And he was known in the department as someone who could solve cases that no one else could solve. And the reason that he could solve cases that no one else could solve was because he was cutting corners, because he was coercing confessions, because he was manipulating evidence. And he was essentially, for lack of a better term, hemming people up. And because crime was so bad, because these defendants were largely Latino men, Black men, Latino women, people weren't paying attention. And he was able to, over the course of about 10 years, send a number of people to prison based on evidence that we would never use in a trial today.
So now, what the hell happened? What did previous DAs and prosecutors just simply accept his word and his work? No verification? Was it guns planted? Was it lack of DNA? I mean, how did this happen?
Well, it was a mess, right? And some of it wasn't as obvious, right? So you would have an eyewitness who would go and identify the defendant and say that's the person who did it. And what we later found out is that the detective was coercing that, or the detective had told them that's the person who shot your loved one. And then the people would be like, oh, okay, and went along with it. And if it wasn't elicited at trial, you didn't know. There was a case, for example, where there was a photo array where they lay out the photos of potential suspects, where someone identified a different person in that photo array than the defendant. And what Detective Guevara did was take that photo array, put it in a file cabinet in a basement, and it wasn't discovered for 30 years. So this was a guy who had all kinds of tactics that he would use, some not so obvious to people. And again, you had these people saying, hey, he is manipulating things, but they were largely men of color in a high crime neighborhood where it was, are you going to take the word of these men or a noted detective? And most people took the word of a noted corrupt detective.
Now, how did your team discover what was going on and discover the truth?
So that's the sad part, Roland. When I came into office in 2016, Detective Guevara was known. There had been a report commissioned all the way back in 2013 that found that he had been engaging in these practices and said that the prosecutor's office should look at these cases to see if they should be overturned. Now, my predecessor, Anita Alvarez, got that report in 2013 and did nothing with it.
Wait. You came into office when?
December 1st, 2016.
So she got a report. Anita Alvarez got a report in 2013, and for 3 years sat on it, did nothing.
We didn't see any affirmative convictions being vacated from 2013 until 2016. There were 2 cases that were done in 2016. But since 2016, well over 24 of those cases have gone through and those convictions have been overturned. But yes, there was a period of years in which it was identified that this detective was problematic and the system did nothing about it.
So your team, when did y'all see the report, and then what did you begin to put in place to begin to look into these cases?
So the report was on my desk when I got there. It was waiting for me. And we had cases that were already working their way through what we call post-conviction, where people have been in prison and they're asking for another review of their case. And so right when I got there were cases that were sitting and waiting and going to hearings where we were starting to lose. And I'll be honest, our office, had a history of protecting convictions at all costs. And we were saying we're not going to protect convictions where we have concerns about the evidence. And you should know these are all murder cases. And so people are reluctant to overturn a murder case. But starting in 2017, I think April of 2017, 5 months into my tenure, we vacated the first of the convictions under my tenure. And like I said, since then, through both the courts and through my office saying we are no longer standing by these cases, well over 24 cases have been overturned. Yesterday was the first ever what we would call mass vacating of convictions in one day. 7 murder convictions thrown out, never in the history of Cook County,
Wow.
and I don't in the history of the country.
So how many total? So he's accused of framing up to 51 people. How many total cases have been overturned or convictions thrown out? And are you now examining other cases he was involved in?
So the number we keep trying to get our hands around, we believe the number is somewhere around 32 cases, not just from my term, but before all of the cases combined. And we have an additional 3 cases that we have reviewed, and we are not going to object to those convictions being overturned. And we have said, and we said in 2019, we did a call out for others who may have not had their cases come to us to bring those cases to us. So we anticipate that there will be more cases coming, but all told, we estimate about 35 of those convictions will be thrown out.
Now, what happened to this cop?
This cop is collecting 2 pensions, a Chicago Police Department pension and a Chicago Park District pension, and is living in San Antonio. And the unfortunate reality is, much like with, John Burge, what people might not remember as a commander here in Chicago who tortured Black men on the south side of Chicago to get them to confess to crimes, and was never prosecuted for the torture he inflicted. He ultimately went to jail for lying at a deposition because of the statute of limitations, which is the amount of time we could take someone to trial. With Detective Guevara, most of his perjury that he committed in these cases, a lot of these acts that he did happened in the mid-90s, which meant that the statute of limitations for prosecuting him for those acts have passed. But we are looking to see, he has been called in depositions. He has pled the Fifth repeatedly. To your point that you made in your introduction, he will not answer questions about his work. And so we have to look and see if under oath he has given testimony within the last several years for potential perjury charges.
So you're telling me a Chicago cop frames nearly 3 dozen people or even higher.
Yeah.
These people spend years in prison, and he's chilling. He's collecting thousands upon thousands of dollars in taxpayer funds, and he's good.
And the other part of that, and the taxpayer is paying these men and women for what he inflicted upon them. Already there have been tens of millions of dollars that have been spent compensating the men and women who were victimized by his actions for their wrongful convictions. And so, yes, while he collects a pension, Chicago taxpayers are paying out of pocket to settle these lawsuits against those who have gone to prison based on evidence from him.
Are there any state officials who are proposing a change in law to where you get rid of the statute of limitations for police officers? Because again, I remember that other story, the heinous actions he was involved in. And look, we've seen, other Chicago police officers, and let's be honest, the police union, they're not friends of yours. They don't like progressive DAs because they protect cops like this one here.
Yeah, it's been really hard to get movement legislatively around expanding statute of limitations for misconduct. And so we have not seen that at all. I think there is an appetite from the taxpayer. You know, when this news hit yesterday, not a single reporter was surprised. We've been following Detective Guevara for years. No one was like, oh, how could this happen? There's been this casual acceptance of this terrible behavior. And this acceptance of paying out these payouts between Detective Guevara, Sergeant Watts, who was another Chicago police officer for whom we vacated over 200 convictions for shaking down residents of the IDB Wells public housing projects, and John Burge for torture. You know, the city of Chicago with others have spent well over $500 million in the course of the last 10, 15 years on police misconduct cases. It is not financially sustainable for us to continue along this path. And the way that we hold police officers accountable is to make them actually accountable. If you have to pay out of your pocket, if you have to acquire insurance to do this work, if you are going to literally be held accountable by perhaps going to prison for your actions, you are less likely to engage in that. And we have not had a robust system of accountability for police misconduct here in Illinois.
That is so unfortunate. And look, last point here that we have to deal with. This stuff like this is one of the reasons why residents in Chicago don't want to talk to cops, don't want to share information when it comes to wrongdoing. You mentioned the other, and look, we're talking white cops, Latino cops, black cops. So this ain't a white thing in Chicago, because the Watts cop, I believe, African-American you're talking about. And so shaking folks down, not trusting. This is precisely why there's a level of mistrust in Chicago and why you have, low rates of closing cases, because people can't trust who they're talking to.
That's exactly right. You know, people try to knock me. Why do you spend so much time going back on these cases? Because the neighborhoods most impacted by violence, Roland, have the least amount of trust in law enforcement. And it's not from some like made up myth. It's because they know Sergeant Watts. It's because they know Reynaldo Guevara. It's because they know Burge. And so if I don't trust when I pick up the phone that I'm not going to get a corrupt cop, I'm just not going to pick up the phone. So this is righting the wrongs of the past, but it's also affirmative public safety measure to make sure that people can trust us. So when something harmful happens, they can call us. And so people try to separate public safety and justice reform. You cannot have public safety without meaningful justice reform, which is why I'm committed to doing this work while I'm here.
And this is precisely why you were elected, you were re-elected. People trust you in doing so. And this is why we got to have more DAs like you, because they are, all too often, historically, you've had district attorneys who have refused to go back and look at cases. Craig Watkins did it in Texas. It's happened with other DAs. And you right the wrongs of the past as opposed to protecting individuals who have done wrong. And so, State's Attorney Kim Foxx, always a pleasure. And again, I'm glad to see the people there in Cook County re-elected you, because they want to see restorative justice, and it's needed.
Thank you, Roland.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
When we invest in ourselves, we're investing in what's next for all of us. Growing, creating, making moves that move us all forward. Together, we are Black beyond measure.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?